You are an entrepreneur. Imagine your small business finally lands a big international order, only to learn a new tariff was just introduced. What do? Slash prices to keep the customer? Hold your prices steady and risk losing your customer? Or simply walk away from the deal? This is the impossible choice thousands of small exporters face.
Tariffs that comply with WTO rules are part of the global trading system, and they are generally predictable and manageable. But when the tariffs are increased or applied unpredictably overnight, the impact can be devastating for everyone, especially small exporters. As the UN Small Business Agency that focuses on trade-led growth, we are looking at how tariffs affect small exporters, and more importantly, what you can do to stay resilient in tough times.
But first things first, what are tariffs? A tariff is a tax that a government imposes on goods imported into its country. The primary purpose of tariffs is to make imported goods more expensive, which encourages consumers to buy products produced at home. This can protect local industries from foreign competition and generate some revenue for the government.
But how much of these tariffs are passed on to the consumers, who then have to dig deeper into their pockets? Economists call this tariff pass-through. Let's see how this works with an example of country A selling a shirt to country B. To establish a baseline, let's say there are no tariffs. The cost of making the shirt is $10. The exporter sells it for $12, making $2 in profit. Since now we have no tariffs, the importer buys it for $12, sells it for $20, and makes $8 in profit. Now, country B imposes a 50% tariff on shirts from country A. Let's see how theoretically the tariff is passed through.
Scenario 1. The burden is on the exporter. The cost stays the same, and the exporter sells for $12. The importer pays $18 and sells for $20, but then immediately charges the $6 tariff back to the exporter. In this case, the pass-through rate is 0%. However, if the exporter has no alternative but to absorb the cost of the tariff, they are effectively pushed out of the market.
Scenario 2. The burden is on the importers. The cost is still the same, and the exporter sells for $12 as usual. The importer pays $18 and sells it for $20, losing $6 in profit. In this case, the pass-through rate is 0%.
Scenario 3. The burden is on the consumers. Again, the cost doesn't change, and the exporter sells for $12. The importer pays $18 and sells for $26, making $8 in profit. In this case, the pass-through rate is 100%.
In reality, the burden of tariffs is usually shared by all parties, not as clear-cut as the simplified scenarios we use for educational purposes. But to be clear, in all three scenarios, regardless of the final retail price, importers are the ones who legally pay tariffs at the border to the government authorities. However, how these costs ripple through the supply chain before products hit shelves is more complicated. The degree of pass-through depends on market conditions and product type.
Before we get into tariff pass-through, it's worth pointing out what is not affected by tariffs. Broadly speaking, tariffs are only applied to physical goods crossing international borders. So what if you export digital goods and services? Yep, products such as digital copies of video games, movies, music, and books, and services such as IT consulting, cloud computing, and IP licensing are not directly affected by tariffs under current global rules.
Products under free trade agreements may be exempt from tariffs as well. You can look for agreements that involve your country and see if your products are exempt using our market access map. And with that being said, let's go back to tariff pass-through and what it means to small exporters.
Again, looking just at tariffs and not at other factors that can influence pricing, let's assume the best scenario where you, as a business, have total control over pricing and keeps export prices steady. Tariffs will still reduce demand for your products because they raise the final retail price. Fewer units sold means less profit and cash flow. But the reality is, no one has total pricing control and the prices react to tariffs differently.
Here, we need to introduce a technical term: demand elasticity. Goods with inelastic demand are the ones you must buy, no matter what. Think medicine, bread, and gas. The demand stays relatively stable even if prices rise. Goods with elastic demand are the non-essential ones you enjoy but don't absolutely need, or products that can be easily replaced with domestic counterparts. Think exotic fruits and foreign designer clothes. The demand drops when prices go up. For inelastic goods, tariffs are more likely to be passed on to the consumer in the form of elevated retail prices, assuming the retailers aren't lowering their profit margin. But with elastic goods, exporters often absorb some or all of the tariffs, so the retail price doesn't rise too much. This means voluntarily reducing profit margin or even selling at a loss. Why? Because
it is 10 times more expensive to sign a new customer.
Okay, yes, it was a trick question.
There's also the matter of supply elasticity, which measures how flexible businesses can be when adjusting export volume to price changes in the market. This will also play an important role in determining who bears the cost of tariffs. But for today's video, we're focusing on small businesses with somewhat rigid supply chain and heavy reliance on just a few export markets. In other words, we're talking about exporters with inelastic supply. Making matters worse for small exporters is that large importers can demand discounts, so they don't absorb all the costs. Some small exporters, desperate to keep orders, may eventually comply. Research shows that a 10% tariff can force exporters to cut prices by 3.5%, which is a brutal hit for companies with razor-thin margins already. Even without the pressure from large importers, there's peer pressure. Now, imagine you are confident about your products, and you want to hold your export prices steady during escalating tariffs. But your competitor just lowered their prices. What are you going to do? It's a tough choice. And it's not just about price struggles. Exporters also juggle logistics and custom procedures, which have their own costs.
I know it all sounds doom and gloom, but there are things that businesses and countries can do to mitigate risks and tap into new opportunities. For small businesses, there's no silver bullet in the short term, but small steps, like improving your digital presence or using trade support tools, can make a real difference.
And long term, if you want to stay resilient in difficult times, you need to diversify your export markets. This allows you to reduce dependence on a single market and gives you more flexibility in managing pricing and risks. But of course, this is easier said than done. Export diversification can take years and involves extensive market research, negotiating new contracts, and entering new supply chains. Your local trade support organizations can help you with that. And if you are not already a member, you should definitely reach out.
We also have developed free tools to help you find new markets. With our suite of market analysis tools, you can identify export and import opportunities, compare market access requirements, monitor national trade performance, and make well-informed trade decisions.
And what can countries do? Improving logistics and customs procedures is a good place to start. These kinds of costs are not directly affected by tariffs. Countries can work more closely with each other to make trade more efficient and less costly when moving goods across borders. Namely, implement the WTO's Trade Facilitation Agreement and introduce customs reforms. Countries also need to put regional integration on their fast-track agenda while adding value to their products. That is, transforming raw materials into finished goods. For example, exporting packaged roasted coffee instead of just coffee beans.
These are areas of our expertise, and we'll put relevant links in the description down below. So while tariffs can be painful, knowing your options can make navigating global trade a little easier. If you're an exporter, let us know in the comments how tariffs affect your business, and share this with those who you think might find it helpful.